Hello, everyone. It's 7 o'clock. I am Gwen Alyce Clayton, your awesome host for the evening. Welcome to Krampusnacht and book launch. We're here tonight to celebrate the launch of my latest book, Zinfandel's Grimoire. And I'm still learning how to use this webcam thing. It's driving me nuts. So anyhow, this was just released November 3rd. You can get it on Amazon. Okay, so now we're going to get on to agriculture, and I'm going to look at my cheat sheets for that. So I'm going to read a little passage. I think I have enough light to do that. And then we're going to bring on Stephanie Henry. So just a moment, Stephanie, let me get this part done. So reading Lily's aura, I sensed that she was preoccupied with pressure from the local land peddler, Edie Clark, to sell the farm. Okay, so I should back up a little bit. So Lily Rhodes owns the herb farm next to Fermata Cellars. And so what I'm reading right now is Zinfandel talking about Lily and the pressure that she's having from this local developer. And so Zinfandel, she lived back in she died in 1848. So she doesn't know what a developer is. So she just calls it a land peddler. So she goes on to say, Miss Clark has been around Rivervine for decades. In fact, she is the one who originally sold the black land to the Divinorums in 1969. In recent years, Edie has approached Sevilla and Sage numerous times about selling the property back to her so she can develop it for housing, shopping, and industrial purposes. The Divinorums have always refused. So have all the other commodities with land she wants to seize. In the meantime, the land peddler buys property surrounding commodity territory, hoping the pressure will inspire our farmers and homesteaders to sell their land. The battle is all due to the increased demand for homes that offer an escape from city life, but still sit below the treacherous snowline of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Farmers want to keep the area because the soil is fertile and lies on a gentle slope, providing good drainage for the roots of their crops. The grapevines particularly appreciate the high ash content of the dirt. Ranchers find the expansive grassy fields ideal for livestock to graze. Non-farming families who live in Rivervine need employment, homes, medical care, shopping, recreation, and entertainment opportunities without having to drive their horseless carriages into New Helvetia or Yerba Buena. There is also a large number of people advocating for the nature spirits. These activists do not want the area developed at all. They would rather preserve the land to allow the wild animals to roam freely and the trees to grow majestically. So, I am bringing on Stephanie Henry. Hi, Stephanie. So, Stephanie.
My Bluetooth wouldn't work, so I'm wired, and I keep forgetting how to function with wired headphones.
I know. It's a pain. So, tell me a little bit about what you do as the Fort Wayne Agvocate.
Well, to start with, thank you for having me, Gwen. I'm really honored that you asked. I'm thrilled that I have such incredibly talented friends who are doing really cool things. And in your honor, I toast. I don't normally drink wine, much less red wine, but I could not for you. So
Slancha. I appreciate your sacrifice.
Anything for friends. So I'm Stephanie Henry. I'm the Fort Wayne Advocate is what I've been calling myself. I work in food and farm policy, and I'm an advocate for our communities, for our families, and for our land. And that's a very complicated answer that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But when you talk about food systems, when you talk about food systems, I set myself an alarm. when you talk about food systems, it involves so many things because it's the land and the water. It's also property owner rights. And then you've got so many socioeconomic things and then policy, not to mention all of the vagaries of agriculture. And I got into this because I grew up food insecure. And when I was going to college, working on my business plan for my farm to fork restaurant, I ran into the challenge of not being able to find farmers to supply me here in Indiana, America's heartland. And that just seemed really odd. And I took a break from school, mostly because it was the recession and I didn't have a choice. It was either that or homelessness. And that's the thing that's facing a lot of farmers and a lot of people who aren't farmers. So we're all kind of in this together. But it's kind of like this silent epidemic. And it's really interesting, especially living here in Indiana. I know you've come to us from California, where it's a different kind of agricultural, environment. There's a lot of corporate agriculture, but there's also a lot of family farms and stuff scattered. It's a different kind of environment. Here in Indiana, in the heart of the Midwest, the story of agriculture isn't quite as how people have been led to believe, or even how I was led to believe growing up here. Because I grew up and I always wanted to feed people, and I always wanted to have a farm to fork restaurant, which my teacher, Mrs. Benjamin from Oslo, who has, I think, since changed her mind, told me that nobody wanted farm to fork restaurants. And growing up here and wanting to feed people and being surrounded by farms, I just always assumed it was, learning how to cook and understanding how to eat nutritional things and how to make it fit your time. That was the big challenge. And so I had focused myself on doing a farm to fork restaurant where, we could engage more with people and help to educate them about why they wanted to make those better choices, not just that they wanted to make it. And so finding that there really wasn't the supply was a big game changer for me. And then digging into the history of how we got here, you start to run into, situations like what you're describing in your book. Although here in America, historically, it was mostly the African-American and other migrant farmers who, whose land was, acquired and under threat. But even today, our farmers here are facing incredible land acquisitions and farm consolidations. And just being aware of that and being involved and, a part of that conversation is a big part of what I do. And talking with the farmers and the people out in the rural areas and connecting them with the people who live in the cities or other areas who really care about what they're doing, but don't have the way to engage with them.
Okay. I'm thinking of all my other questions that I had for you. What are some of the issues facing local agriculture today that you haven't already mentioned?
Well, COVID really cast a big magnifying glass on a lot of the issues that our local farmers have been facing for a long time. It just really magnified it because it took away a lot of those larger mainstream corporate supply line options. And, what that means, especially here for us in Indiana, is that while we're in the top 10, I'm not going to give a specific number because it's probably changed, but we're in the top 10 of agriculture production in the country, but we import over 95% of what we consume, the food that we actually eat. And a big majority of what we produce is corn, pork, and soybeans. But the things that we do produce that are edible, a large percentage of that we export, or we have to export out of the state just to process it. An example is that meat processors. We have very few small or mid-sized meat processors in the state that are USDA certified to process things. So the majority of things are consolidated in large corporate pork and beef and chicken slaughterhouses. And so when the pandemic hit and those confined large scale slaughterhouses were seeing lots of exposure and contraction of COVID and had to take precautions, either slow down or shut down, farmers had nowhere to send stuff. And producers and consumers, both had few or no other options. I have quite a few friends who still live in the country and who raise animals and whatnot. And in trying to get an animal for myself butchered, it would have been months waiting. So it makes it really challenging for our local producers to be able to scale up to have the resources to compete with land developers or, what did you call them?
Land peddlers.
Yes, land peddlers. I like that.
Yeah, because she would know what a developer was. So when I lived in California, and this whole thing started, the concept for the book came. I was working for the Elk Grove Citizen. I was lifestyles editor, and at the time, Elk Grove was still an agricultural town. It had one stop sign, and by the time I left, and I only worked there for 14 months. And by the time I left, there had just been all these different, it was ridiculous. There was so much development that went on in that 14 months. And the whole agricultural thing, that's what inspired me to write, to start the book, was this whole thing with Elk Grove, what was going on in Elk Grove. And the farmers, they don't have the money to fight. And then you get people on the city council that all they see is dollar signs, which is important. And I'm not saying that that money's not important. We definitely want to have adequate tax dollars in our city coffers, but the struggles that at what cost? Exactly.
I have an interesting story on that. I actually drove 4.5 hours down to New Washington earlier, just a few months ago, in order to have a conversation with Senator Todd Young at a corn and soybeans meeting. And I went because I was not getting any response from his staff except for form letters. And I really needed to talk to him about why we are not seeing any support or engagement from our senators or any of our federal delegation when it comes to some of the bills, especially like CFAP and other things that would go to small, not only businesses, but also farms and farm families. And so I went down to New Washington because I heard that he was going to be down there because I get all of the notifications. And so I showed up to talk to him, and wouldn't you be surprised, the other corn and soybeans farmers weren't really thrilled with Senator Young either, because it turns out that over the last decade or so, a lot of American companies have gone out of business that ran grain elevators along the river. And those elevators have gotten shut down and then left to kind of fall apart. Well, it turns out that now there are corporations that are, to my understanding, and I've not researched this thoroughly, so it's my understanding that these corporations are owned by other countries like Brazil and China, who are now coming in with the backing and the resources of entire countries, buying these now abandoned grain elevators, fixing them up and putting them back into service. Well, Senator Young's response is, well, that's good. It's more business and dollars, except those dollars.
But are we worried about China?
I mean, I guess apparently they don't see a difference between the worries about China and China businesses buying American assets like grain elevators and land even. There's been a huge consolidation of properties and land buyouts that, I mean, honestly can keep somebody occupied for a good long time trying to trace back the different organizations and corporations and different names that things are under. But you can see the damage as you drive through our state and our communities, you know, where towns are a shadow of themselves or gone entirely. And I see it on my news feeds, on my Twitter feeds, on my Facebook feeds, friends and associates that I have in agricultural communities across the country, you know, are struggling from a suicide epidemic because the median age, there's less than 0.5% of the American population that's currently engaged in growing food that we consume. And of that 0.5%, the median age, I think just past 60, it was 58. Now, like, it was like 58 to 62. Now I think it's like 60 to 65 or something. And almost all of them have no successor, no succession plan, and are well underwater when it comes to their mortgages, loans, inputs. And then when you add in, or when you factor in the impacts from the last couple of years, the year that we, a year or two ago, when we had all the very, very wet spring, some farms quite literally had already bought one crop to go in. And then when they weren't able to get that in by the deadline, they bought another crop to try and meet the next deadline. And when that didn't happen, they bought yet a third crop of seeds and inputs. And some of them didn't get any of it in the ground. And those who didn't get the kind of yields that they were anticipating. And it's just, the whole thing is just so, it's been so corrupted and so diverted from anything that's really functional after this pursuit of like business, whatever. I'm one of those individuals that's kind of a throwback. Food is for eating, and agriculture, while there's a business component to it, I don't understand the value of trying to make $1 if you can't put food on your table. Because, our communities, even the agricultural communities, aren't producing enough to support themselves, much less support all of us living in the cities who think that we can just take a ride out to the country and load up the, boot of the car with, some eggs and chicken and a side of beef and, be good to go. It doesn't work like that.
All right. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been wonderful talking to you. And you have a happy holiday.
You as well.